Oh, the humanity. You can't write this one. It gets techier than techie things on the 22nd of the 62025. Over the next 10 minutes or less, we're going to talk about a couple different things. Toto, billionaire settings, dividend to the tune of 40 million Great British pounds. We'll touch on that. So too, we'll talk about George Russell's options doing one of these by the second. And then finally, we get to the main event and we'll talk about why Fred Vasseur and his tenure is more than tenuous. He won't last it out. I don't think he'll see through to the end of 2026. Gets techier than techie things. In the first instance, Toto Wolff, for the avoidance of doubt, is a 33% shareholder of Mercedes Petronas AMG, the F1 team, in conjunction with Sir Jim Radcliffe and Daimler, each of whom own 33% both. 1.3 billion is Toto the boy who cried wolf's net worth per Forbes. And we see, therefore, that the 2024 results of Mercedes F1 team have done one of these. They are caking 60 G's, baby, in the words of Conor McGregor. That revenue in 2024 is 16% up. 546 million now versus, or last year even, 2023 versus 636 million in 2024, mainly driven by commercial boost, sponsorship, licensing settings, a la WhatsApp, let's say. 60% of revenues what sponsorship contribute. It's chaos, chat. I knew that these guys were swimming in muddy. 60 G's, baby. I understood that, but this is levels. This is a difference in extents and not kinds. And that yields a net profit of 120.3 million Great British pounds. What are we doing, chat? Up year on year, 50%. These F1 teams are printing money. That yields a dividend, chat. Brace yourself. Techier than techie things, of 125 million Great British pounds. We're talking sterling. Oh, the humanity. That will be issued to shareholders, of which 33% belongs to Toto, the boy who cried wolf. 75 million and 50 million. Toto is set to see a dividend of 41.2 million pounds. What are we doing, chat? This dude, I can never call him Toto the boy who cried wolf again, He's got his financial resources in order, his monetary I's dotted and T's crossed. Therefore, oh, and by the way, if we're talking about Mercedes, we need to have ourselves a conversation about King George Russell of Kings Lynn Norfolk. We know that dude still doesn't have a contract announced for 2026. Put some respect on his name, Toto. The dude's been incredible driver of the year, some say, season to date 2025. So why then does he not have a contract? This is reminiscent of Ferrari in 2024 when we were saying, why haven't they given Sainz and Charles Leclerc a contract extension? Well, we know why now, because they were circling around Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. That's why. And you'd be forgiven for thinking, therefore, a similar circumstance ensues over at the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth, knowing that Toto's already had himself a gazillion conversations with four soon-to-be five-time champion Maximilian Verstappen. Two in particular stand out. Miami Grand Prix race weekend, there were conversations between Toto, team principal of Mercedes, and team Verstappen, Raymond Vermeulen, Jos Verstappen too. So too at the summer break, another set of conversations were had. They broke down then, but that doesn't mean that Toto still isn't baying for the signature in blood of one Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be five-time champion John Noble. For the avoidance of doubt, there are all F1 journos are created equally, but some are created more equally than others. John Noble of Autosport, one of the goatiest ones, methinks, he says this: that George Russell, on the back of the context, the negotiation, his territory being very mercurial, that's probably not the word. He's operating on very shaky ground if he wants to continue as an F1 driver. The windows of opportunity in F1 go like this, and sometimes only the most discerning-eyed among us can see that. Mention no names: Fernando Alonso 0506. Here's what John Noble says: that King George Russell of Kings Lynn Norfolk has already had conversations with Christian Horner. Sadly, though, because of their driver structure, a very clear number one and a very clear number two. Mention no names: Max Sonoda, Max Checo Perez, Max Danny Rick, Max, Liam Lawson, because of their driver structure, there is no room at the Red Bull Inn for a fire-breathing dragon in King George Russell, who we know Max Verstappen already doesn't have any time for on the back of their interactions at the Qatar Grand Prix last year. I will stick you on your head, George, into turn one for the way that you conducted your activities in the steward's room, infringement, qualifying sessions. George doesn't fit Red Bull structure, therefore, notwithstanding the fact that Christian Horner at back end of last year said, I don't know what Toto's on about, always Max Verstappen, my driver's name is in his mouth. He needs to have I know that George Russell doesn't have a contract. Maybe we need to start having conversations with him. That's Christian's words, not mine. Aston Martin has also been rumoured. However, John Noble has had conversations with Aston Martin insiders, and they've said this, that Alonso and Stroll are already under contract for 2026 new rule and reg change. Aston Martin don't have a third car, so lest George Russell want to become a simulation test driver, he would be better staying at Mercedes. But there is no room either at the Aston Martin. In 2027 is something different. However, we might be having ourselves another conversation because driver's silly season moves and twists and turns. The paradigm shifts happen by the second in F1. So for now, the conclusion is this, the Aesop's fable is this: George Russell is pole sitter at Mercedes. 2026, they will have themselves a god tier power unit, and all of the chatter from George in front of the world's press and media is with a view to its posturing, its corporate peacocking, its negotiation. Therefore, George is desperate to get that contract, and Toto, the boy who cried wolf today, has come out and said in the next couple of weeks, expect an announcement. King George Russell of Kingsley in Norfolk will potentially, as the highest probability eventuality in this automotive Rubik's Cube equation, is that King George Russell stays at Mercedes per Jonathan Noble. Oh, and by the way, here's where it gets to Andy. I'm telling you, we're getting techie Benzy. John, we're about to get very mood. Brace yourself. It's about to get techier than techie things. Fred Vasseur is gonzo. The sword of Damocles is about to be wielded on that dude. This is now a matter of when and not if. We've spoken already about John Elkann being obsessed with superseding team principle of Scuderia Ferrari, the red car with the yellow badge, black prancing horse atop, with Christian Horner. He's obsessed with this. There were conversations had in 2023, but they've been happening now yet and still, because Elkann doesn't want Frederick Vasseur, now deemed characterized as a seasoned underperformer. Year on year, compare the different spot, the difference even. Ferrari ended up as second in the Constructors' Championship, 14 points behind McLaren as at the end of the 2024 season. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with 10 races in the books, they are 191 points away from McLaren. Spot the difference. This is underperformance central. Now, of course, you have to have this conversation under the umbrella heading of McLaren having a god tier car. The MCL 39 is ridiculous, reminiscent of Senna Prost settings in 88 and 89. The dominant machine on the grid. It would be disingenuous to argue anything other than that. And so the circumstance is anomalous. But John Elkann's not looking to hear that chat. He doesn't care about that. What he doesn't want to see is Ferrari team principal bringing shame on the family name. You heard Montezemolo earlier on this season saying that leadership at Ferrari is fugazi. It's been rubbish, not just this year, but for as long as he can remember. And if Montezemolo's saying that, you best believe that John Elkann, CEO of Fiat, Ferrari, Stellantis, will be taking notes as well. Here's the context, chat. It is not just underperformance at Ferrari, it is politics. You'll know already there was a chap at Stellantis who was instrumental in getting Frederick Vasseur that role. He's now left, being replaced by a chap called Antonio Filosa. Maybe he comes with different agency, different strategic objectives, wants a different dude in that Scuderia Ferrari team principal role, potentially. Elkann already wants himself Christian Horner and is having conversations in the background in real time, as he always has done. Ben Evans of F1 Oversteer writes that this is a bit techier now, though. You've seen the articles. We've gone through them over the past few days. There is the Gazzetta in Italy. And again, let me say this for the avoidance of doubt, because this is critical to consider. The Italian media don't mess around. This is Italy's team. This is the tifosi. They will spit at you in the street. If failure, underperformance in perpetuity is your lot, win and you'll never ever have to buy a drink or a meal in an Italian restaurant ever in your life. That's Jean Todd's lot. That's what Frederick Vasseur is looking to achieve now. However, Ben Evans of Oversteer writes that this is beset on both sides with nuance and wrinkles. The tifosi is a political infrastructure that the one that they call Frederick Vasseur is going to have to navigate. Here's what he says. And again, he's referring to Ralph Back again. All F1 journos are decent, created equally, but some, Ralph Back, are created more equal than others. Here's what he says. It's a real problem, these articles, what have just been written in the Italian media. Here's why. Ralph Back says, quote, normally you don't have to take every story that circulates the internet seriously. But in this case, if you know the background at Ferrari and the politics at Fiat, you have to take seriously what Gazzetta dello Sport and Corriere della Sera are saying. He says this. Corriere della Sera and Gazzetta dello Sport released this story about Frederick Vasseur being in trouble, that the sword of Damocles is about to be wielded almost at the same time. Why is that significant? Because Ralph Back argues that something is happening in the background, that there were already other candidates as replacements, and that the big bosses at Fiat and Ferrari, President John Elkann, is already talking to people who could and would have been replacements. Mention no names. Christian Horner, the man who built the house that is the balls that are red. If, continues this article, Ralph Back again, legendary F1 journo, if it hadn't been for these two newspapers, you would say, yes, these are only rumours. Nothing to see here. Do you know what I mean? Conjecture and speculation as per usual in F1. Though some say there is no F1 smoke without F1 fire. But Ralph Back says this, and here's where it gets techier than techie things, chat. But from my experiences, I know that Fiat is also a shareholder in the publishing house that publishes these newspapers. We're talking about Corriere della Sera and Gazzetta dello Sport, the newspapers that are publishing these articles questioning the veracity of Frederick Vasseur, the validity of his tenure, and whether he will be sacked in the short to medium term. This is techie, chat. Meaning, therefore, that John Elkann, if he hadn't wanted for these stories to escape, to be leaked in the Italian press and media, he would have had power of veto. He would have made sure, but he didn't do, because he wanted these stories out there with a view to put pressure on the incumbent Frederick Vasseur and wave the red flag that Christian Horner, the door is open, mate, as and when you're ready. Blank check settings, write your own number. Ralph Back continues, that means if they write a story like that, they must check with the publisher. The publisher will then talk to John Elkann, who wants to do this and that. What do you think? And it's like a blessing. These new stories don't get out to the press and media. We wouldn't see them if John Elkann didn't want them to be out there. So what does that mean, chat? What's the Aesop's fable? There is agency in this now. There are no circling the wagons around Frederick Vasseur and his tenure as team principal of the red car with the yellow badge and black prancing horse atop. No, John Elkann is doing one of these, actively ushering him out the door, turning the media screw on his tenure. The publisher will talk to Elkann, who wants to do this. It's like a blessing. That's the problem, continues Ralph Back, per Ben Evans of F1 Oversteer, that it could mean something. I'm quite sure that Elkann found out about these stories about Frederick Vasseur and pressure and him potentially being replaced, and didn't stop them coming out. Elkann could have, CEO Scuderia Ferrari, could have kiboshed these stories, but he didn't. What does that tell you? Ralph Back bookends his soliloquy this way. The message is that he's under pressure. He's being watched by John Elkann, CEO Scuderia Ferrari, who is looking for a successor, but he's not quite there yet. But it is the beginning of the end, one might say. Frederick Vasseur. They told us that this was nonsense. Don't jump the gun. Cameron, stop being so premature, but we are forward facing as far as the news, the F1 news that we like to consume, with a view to understand the eventualities. Do you know what I mean? How is this going to transpire at Scuderia Ferrari? And per Ben Evans over at F1 Oversteer and Ralph Back, legendary F1 journalist, it looks like Frederick Vasseur's reign of terror, some say, 191 points adrift in the Constructors' Championship, might come to an end sooner than most people expect. Oh, the humanity.